Hello, Professor Anderson.
Hello.
Thank you so much for speaking with us today. I'm Chris, this is Jewel, and this is Andrew, and we're very excited to hear about your and Professor Southern's relationship and how it impacted the musical scene. So we're going to start. I'm going to ask you a couple questions about your childhood and musical influences, and we'll move on to your early relationship with Professor Southern, and finally your life in Boston. So to start, Uh, who introduced you to classical music and to composers like Samuel Coleridge Taylor and William Grant Still?
My mother was a musician. She played the piano very well. And not only did she play African American music, she also played a lot of Brahms. And of course, when I became a composer, she was disappointed because I didn't write like a Brahms. And this is just typical. Most parents, they have ideas of what it should be, and it never turns out like they expect. But I was fortunate that I had an aunt on my father's sister finished New England Conservatory, so she too was an influence on me. And she founded the music department at Morgan State College, and Louise Clarkson was her name. And I can never remember a time that I was not surrounded by music. When I say music, I mean all kinds of music. Um, I remember my mother took me when I was very small to see an opera performed at the at Watergate, and I turned around and asked her. I said it was a Mozart opera. I said, "Mother, are those the costumes people wore when Mozart wrote the Minuet in G?" And she said the white folks were astonished that I knew something about the Minuet in G, but it was a natural part of my environment. And of course, I was also raised at the Howard Theater. In fact, I failed seventh grade because I was always going down to the Howard Theater listening to the big band. And that really saved me in many ways. Nothing I could have gotten from junior high school that really could have compared with that.
When did you begin to consider a compositional or spiritual relation to these composers or to any other African American composers of classical music?
I already knew them for some time, so it was a strange connection. Um, I had my teacher asked me why didn't I write more African influence about music. I told him I didn't come there to study African music. I knew that. In fact, it was part of my heritage. I really wanted to know white music, as they would call it. So I wanted to know everything about that I could. I was a close friend of William Dawson, as I mentioned, Still, Eileen Southern. Anybody you name of my generation, I basically knew. Hale Smith, Ulysses K. All of them were influential in my life, and I was indeed fortunate that it was sort of like a club that you knew everybody, yet you were not a part of a particular world. That you were part of the music community, and at the same time I was interested in jazz. I was going to the International Raven Society. That's where I met Dick Pittman and leader of Boston Musical Viva, and we've been friends ever since. So my life has never been compartmentalized in terms of black music. And I would encourage anybody that goes into any field to be inclusive, certainly try to learn as much about the field as they can. And you don't know where your next influence is coming from.
Who do you think had the most impact on your diverse compositional style?
There are many. One of my favorite composers is Monteverdi. I've been to his grave in Venice. Um, he he was certainly an influence, but at the same time that I was listening to Monteverdi, I was also listening to Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Andy Kirkins, Clouds of Joy. That's the band that Charlie Parker came up to New York with. So I mean, I've been on two tracks all along, and I think that's one thing that saved me. That I was able to combine these influences And certainly a major influence would certainly be Igor Stravinsky, most composers of my generation, and so before that was certainly Hindemith. But I would not say one composer, I would say a lot of composers and a lot of performers too.
When you first began to work on this style, did you get a lot of pushback from composition teachers or peers?
I have never understood my style, let me put it that way, and I don't want to understand it. I just want to do it, you know. So, I mean, I don't think I have a style. My wife said she knows my music when she hears it, but I don't know what she's talking about. I think what you have, what I did was certainly had teachers that encouraged me to listen to everything and analyze everything. I was fortunate I had a series of what I would call fascinating great teachers. I first discovered I was going to be a composer at Penn State when I took the course as an elective. Up until that time, I thought I'd be a band leader, and I knew instruments very well. And he actually encouraged me to go on and pursue a doctorate. I didn't want to take his word for it, so I went to the Cincinnati Conservatory. There I studied with Dr. Scotty Houston. And he also encouraged me to go on in composition and go to the University of Iowa to pursue a doctorate. So I've been fortunate, and in Iowa I had two fantastic teachers. One was George Bazanson, my major advisor, and also Richard Herbig, of a tremendous influence also. Both marvelous teachers that I think were right for me at the right time. I was a terrible composer, I might add. That I didn't know what I was doing. I was just doing things, and the ability to analyze, the ability to have certain roots, the ability to have certain coherence in compositional procedures. And this has also all been identified by Mark Devoto, who's participating with John McDonald, who's writing a book on me at the Tufts. And this is a very important book because it not only talks about my music, but it talks about which is the first opera ever written in America. And it also talks about the technical aspect of my music that's always been there, but never, it's unconscious, conscious. If I'm writing a Passacaglia, I know what a Passacaglia is and I stick to it. But that's not my goal, is to write a Passacaglia. My goal has always been to write the music that I want to write.
So could we step back a little bit away from your music itself and talk about how Eileen Southern or other peers influenced the way that you thought about your music or its social purpose?
Well, I'm going to just talk about Eileen Southern because I think she deserves a lot of attention and is very important to the history of the music department at Harvard. And that's why I'm glad that Professor Oji invited me to come there, because Eileen was a phenomenal woman. She, as you know, her PhD was in Renaissance music. And she had taught Renaissance music all her life. And when she got to Harvard, she was pigeoned into African American music because of her famous book. And this book actually changed the course of African American music. Now, I want to say first, there was a book by Maud Cooney Hare on the history of African American music, and this book served as a model for Eileen Southern. Eileen's book is monumental in that she applied her Renaissance research tool to the music of Black Americans and documents everything that's written in that book. And that book was a bestseller and certainly is responsible for the creation of African American music programs in colleges throughout the country. She also participated in the advance of women on the faculty at Harvard University. Now, she was one of the few, and certainly a black woman, fewer, I would say. And her presence alone, along with other women, made it possible for Carl now to be chairman. And you had a woman president. So, I mean, the advancement of women have been monumental. I don't know about the advancement of blacks. I mean, I know about the Skip Gates program, but I'm talking about throughout the university. I don't know whether these advancements are going on or not. I can't comment on that. Eileen, one story I remember about Eileen, she interviewed Eubie Blake, the great pianist and humanist, I might add, who came along at the time of Scott Joplin. Incidentally, they met one time at a club in New York. He was on the street, and he walked up to Eubie Blake, to Scott Joplin rather, and he said, "I'm Scott Joplin. I'm Eubie Blake, the composer," and Scott Joplin said, "Yes, that's good. I'm glad to hear that." And then they walked away. No conversation, but both were extremely shy and certainly important figures. Now, the story I want to tell about Eileen and Eubie is that Eileen was interviewing Eubie, and she said she noticed that, she told me this, she said he kept looking to the side and never looked at her throughout the entire interview. And then suddenly she realized that the microphone was over there. Now, Eubie was a product of vaudeville, so the microphone was more important than talking to her. So she said, from that time on, I realized that microphones are more important than my presence asking questions, and I thought that was quite humorous.
How was the music of Black Americans received by other Black composers? Can you speak at all to that?
All of us had the same destiny. And I think this is fascinating because I'm indebted to both Hale Smith and Ulysses K, because both of them were in New York and they knew everything. Hale was editor of one of the major music publishers in New York, so he knew everybody. Ulysses was assistant to Oliver Daniels, the head of BMI Classical Music Division. Both of them told me that you will get only so far and you will get no support. And once I heard that message, I knew that was going to be my destiny, and it has been my destiny, and I haven't worried about it. I could care less. In other words, white society doesn't control what I do in any way. And of course, all the composers that I know are writing as much music as they can. And so with this advice, I was able to just move on and go on and do what I wanted to do. And their advice has been like a beacon to me, because it not only helped me, it also enabled me to be informed about the other artists. Now, I had three good friends. Rich Hunt, who was my sponsor and would play anything I wrote. In Chicago, he would have a benefit concert in his studio, which was a large streetcar barn, and invite his patrons, and I would have a piece premiered there. And he had contact with me. He was on the board of music of the Baroque, so I had contact with loads of musicians. So I never suffered from lack of performance. Now, Richard and Leon and I had noticed one thing. You're encouraged up to a certain point, and then it stops. Now, Richard was a sculptor. He has sculpture all over Chicago. In fact, he wanted to do what the Medicis did in Venice. He made Chicago his, and he has sculpture all over Chicago. But Richard never got the types of commission white sculptors were getting. So he understood that all along. Leon, as a writer, He was editor of Muhammad Speaks. He was not a Muslim, but he was a Catholic. And he understood that all of us would only get so far, and that would be the end of that. And of course, that's the story of most black. Well, it's not my story. It's the story of Holly Wilson. I can just name those composers, and it's the same condition.
So were other black composers happy with the way that Eileen Southern spoke about them in her writing?
I think we looked on Eileen as a documenter of the culture, and that's what we do. In other words, no composer creates, we recreate. And of course, in the process of recreating, we document what happens in the culture. And Eileen did that in such a marvelous and professional way that we are all certainly indebted to her. I mentioned the Maud Cooley Hair book was the model for Eileen. Now, what Eileen's book generated was fascinating. In other words, if it wasn't for Eileen, you wouldn't have the Center for Black Music Research with Samuel Floyd in Chicago. She was on the board, and she had a tremendous influence on Samuel Floyd. Now, Sam created a center that not only collected and distributed black music, but also was active in the performance of black music. I conducted their first ensemble, which premiered a lot of arrangements of early black composers done by Hale Smith. Um, Sam hired Dominic DeLerma. That's the second important person to come spin off from Eileen. Now, DeLerma was, at the time I met DeLerma, I was teaching at Langston in Oklahoma. And DeLerma used to come over and have lunch or dinner with his son, ATN. And DeLerma was interesting in that he was not only trained as a musicologist, he was a librarian, and he spoke several languages. So that made him valuable. So we were talking one day, and I said, "You've done a lot of research on Igor Stravinsky." I said, "Anybody can do that. We don't need you for that." I said, "What I want you to do is to sit down and go out and do research and document the number of black composers globally. Globally. African influence composers globally. The byproduct of that is Sam's Dictionary of black international black composers. Um, Dominic did that. He went all over the world, found out information. These composers appear in that book. So there's a whole history there that's very important. Now, the spin-off from that is, I find very fascinating. Now I'm talking about the future. Uh, Sam had an assistant, Melanie Zach. She was Sam's assistant at the center. She completed Sam's book that he was working on with Sam's wife at the time of his death, and since has gone on to be at the Smithsonian Institution. Also at the Smithsonian Institution is one of my former students, Bill Banfield, who most of you know has been for years at Berkeley College. Now, Bill is in the process. He just got because he was there as a research fellow. He's got a 3-year contract now, and he's retiring from Berkeley. He's just got a request from the publications department of the Smithsonian for 3 books. They have seen outlines of these books, and he is busy. I told him about Eileen, Zach, and they're going to get together, I know. And these books are something to look forward to in the future. So I feel quite confident that although it shifted from Eileen at Harvard to the Center for Black Music Research with this journal, and then to the Smithsonian, I think that's a proper advancement. I'm tickled to death with those developments.
Thank you very much for that. We're excited to learn more about your relationship personally with Eileen Southern. So Andrew has a couple of questions for you.
Hello, Professor Anderson. How and when did you first meet Eileen Southern, and what were your perceptions of her?
I met Eileen at the convention. She shows up everywhere in her quiet manner, and she was never, she was there and not there. Let me put it that way. She had the ability to come in and phase out, come in and phase out. And she not only had a good friendship with me, but I mean, every composer of my generation can tell you she was their friend. I mean, that was, she and Joe, I can't speak of her without talking about her husband because he was always there with her. Her quiet manner, her industrious attitude, her scholarship, her ability to not impose, her friendship, and by that I mean genuine friendship with all of us, made it possible for us to feel comfortable with her as part of the loop. It wasn't someone that wanted to write a book and then disappear. This happens all the time in academia. She was just a part of the community, and certainly we all profited from her scholarship.
Building off that community, did you feel a sense of a community among black musicians and black researchers in the late 60s and early 70s?
I wouldn't say early 70s. I would say I was sort of active in the late 60s. And fortunately, Louise Toppin has taken over. And they just had a national conference on black music. And there are tapes for that national conference. And I understand it was excellent with performances and papers read. And she's making a major contribution at the University of Michigan, which I think is a fantastic music department, I might add.
Did you see any changes in thought or climate in the field after the publication of Southern's works?
Oh, definitely. I mentioned these two sentences on Columbia College and its journal, and also the Smithsonian's involvement now. But I think it was certainly more than that. I mean, the book by sales alone for Norton Press speaks for itself. I mean, I think that the fact that it circulated so widely that a lot of people wanted to know this information they never had. And of course, I mean, Ralph Ellison wrote a book about Invisible Man. Black people, I might say, are invisible to many in the white society. I'll give you an example. I was talking to John Rockwell, the music critic for the New York Times. He is retired now, and he came down to a funeral, and I attended this funeral, and I asked John, I said, Joplin is the father of indigenous music, and he's very important to the history of opera in this country. And he said, oh no, we have known for years, this is a quote, Joplin is the father of American opera. Again, I'll repeat it. Joplin is the father of American opera. So I asked him, I said, well, why don't you print it in the Times? He walked away. Now you have to ask him why he walked away. I can think of several reasons, but I don't know. But he walked away. So dealing with a situation where we are invisible, yet the facts support us. And since the facts support us, we realize eventually truth always rises. So we're not going to be defeated. I mean, sooner or later, people are going to say Joplin is the father of American opera. Now, I got a call from the Metropolitan Opera asking me to comment on Porgy and Bess. Now, I thought of it as a trick question, really. They know I couldn't comment on Porgy and Bess without talking about Joplin, so I refused to participate. Now, Porgy and Bess is an important opera. I don't want to minimize that. 1911, Joplin published Treemonisha. 1930, Gershwin published Porgy and Bess. Now, Porgy and Bess is what I call an opera that takes the low road. he said it was a folk opera. It's not a folk opera, it's a jazz opera. Premonition is a folk opera. It deals with the folk and superstition and ignorance and education and enlightenment being the answer to the problem. Gershwin's opera, mendacious, vicious in the use of life, sinful, and at the same time loving. All of these are combined in this great opera that Gershwin wrote. Joplin takes the high road. Joplin road is about redemption, education, and its importance to Black just coming out of slavery, and the desire to take the high road. Now, you can have all the performance of Porgy and Bess that you want. I don't care about that, and I'm glad to see it, because it's a vehicle that has enabled a lot of Black singers, particularly women, to go on to the Met and have great careers. But you cannot talk about opera without talking about Joplin. You can't do it. At least I couldn't do it. Let me put it that way. In our performance, we had Robert Shaw conducting, one of the great conductors of America. And I don't want to get off on this tangent, but I can prove to you that Shaw is the great American conductor of our time. Nobody will say that. They say he's a choral conductor. And then I asked, I had a friend that played with the Philadelphia Orchestra. He told me, he said, you know, Shaw doesn't have any stick technique. So I asked him, I said, how many people have you seen cry after a concert with all these composers that have all this stick technique that you're talking about? The point is that Shaw transformed music to go into the heart. And anybody can tell you a concert by Robert Shaw in Moscow was standing ovation and Bach B minor mass. They couldn't get, they went down, took showers, came back up, and the audience still on the floor applauding. Well, all these conductors with stick technique, tell me about them. I want to know how many people cried, how many people felt the music that the composer felt inside. That's what I want to know. No, we don't talk about that. We talk about pointing to the oboe when he comes in. Not important to me, not important to me.
Thank you so much.
Andrew, you're the conductor over there.
Thank you so much for that, Professor Anderson. Jewel here is going to ask a little bit more about your relationship with Eileen Southern.
Oh, so just to quickly ask about Porgy and Bess. So when approximately did the Met call you to be a consultant about that production?
Oh, it was about a month ago, I'd say. It was a month ago. And of course, they wanted me to say something positive or negative. I don't think they cared, but they didn't want me to say what I was thinking. In other words, I knew they wouldn't report what I was thinking. So I just said, no, I don't want to say anything positive or negative. I just decided not to participate. Some fights are better avoided than getting into.
Right, okay. So thank you again. This is like a huge honor and privilege to speak to you and to hear about your relationship with Eileen Southern. So as Andrew said, I'm going to ask questions mostly about your time in Boston and as a professor at Tufts. And I believe you two overlapped a little bit while she was at Harvard. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So my first question is, how did you and Southern stay in contact? When you first served as the composer in residence for the Atlanta Symphony, and how did your mode of contact change when you relocated to Boston?
Well, it was mostly personal contact when we see each other. We'd see each other frequently. And we had friends in common, so that added to it. I think she was, I think of Eileen as being spiritual rather than academic, in a quiet manner. I mean, in a very quiet manner. I mean, she was not aggressive. She was not offensive. She was respectful. And all of these things add up to in my mind, to a person of unusual capabilities and certainly humanistic values. When I was at Tufts, we overlapped, of course, so we would compare notes. And of course, the fact that the musicologist wouldn't let her teach musicology was a thorn in her side. And I understood it. I understood it well. I mean, the musicologists are not there now, but the fact that they did not allow her to teach that was really an insult to her. And certainly she talked about it on many occasions.
Great, thank you. And also, if you're comfortable with sharing, so when you lived in Boston at this time, how was it like for African Americans in terms of like the racial atmosphere, in terms of your teaching? Yeah, if you could kind of give us the scene of how that was for you.
Well, I was penniless when I went to teach at Tufts. And fortunately, I've been lucky all my life. The Citizens for Open Winchester got the down payment on the house, and I paid that back at 2%. And also, this enabled me to live in the next town over from Tufts in Medford. And I was in Winchester. Living in Winchester was very interesting. My son used to walk home from the transit system, and he would get off in Medford and he'd have a long walk, and the police would follow him all the way to the house. And black man in a white community. And my son didn't understand it. I told him because he was black, you know, I mean, to just expect these things. Now, I know a little bit about police because I taught police in Nashville during the riots of the 60s. I was on a team. I was a humanist. There was an anthropologist, Norman Greenberg, and then a psychologist. I can't think of his name now, but he taught at Vanderbilt. Anyway, the three of us had a course that they had to take. And basically, it went something like this. If you saw 10 people at 15th and Jefferson, that's in the black community, run through a stoplight, what would you do? And they all would say, I'd issue 15 tickets, you know, whatever the number. All right, you're at the corner of so-and-so in Belmead, the white section. You saw 15 people run through a stoplight, what would you do? I'd issue 15 tickets. Then one of them would say, no, you wouldn't. By the time you got to the third, the sergeant would have you on the telephone. So then I said, the law is not just. The law is not enforced equally, and you participate in this. So when you go into a 10 situation, we had it marked from 1 to 10, it's your job to de-escalate the problem. You better be careful about the person you choose as a partner. Because if he's a hothead and he escalates and you go in at a 5 and he goes up 6 and 7, around 8 and 9, you better be drawing your gun. And that's not what you want to do. You want to de-escalate the problem and talk to the people. And that was an interesting experience for me and for them. Now, at the same time I was talking to them, I was talking to my students at Tennessee State. They were talking about raiding the police station to get the guns. And I was telling them that's a crazy idea. You know, crazy people on both sides. And I still believe we got crazy people everywhere in America. In fact, I believe 1/3 of America is crazy. Otherwise, you wouldn't have the president you got. So you can't argue that point. I think we have to become more respectful, more understanding of differences. And I think that's what America's all about. Historically, that's what America is all about. And certainly my experiences at Tufts would be no different from any other black professor there. Gerald Gill has documented it very well as a historian. And John McDonald has a whole chapter devoted about what I did while I was at Tufts. But I enjoyed Tufts mainly because they let me do what I wanted to do. They gave me the freedom to do what I wanted to do with the music department. And certainly I think they're much better off as a department, not because of what I did, but what the people around me did in the department.
Yeah, another follow-up question I had to that was if there were, what were the sorts of barriers that you came across in your profession as a Black scholar in academia? Because we also were reading about Eileen Southern at Harvard and of course all the struggles that she had. So I wanted to see if there were any parallels with your work as well.
I don't know the details of all the struggles Eileen had, but I'm sure they were similar. And of course, I've never worried about struggles. I've always been positive. I always thought about how do you overcome this? You can't be bogged down with struggles. Everybody has struggles. White and Black people have struggles. And the question is, how do you resolve the troubles you got? Nobody knows the trouble I see. It's great spirits. And of course, you have to have a positive attitude. At Tufts, one of the experiences I remember, when I went to Tufts, I used to dress like the college professor, mostly a tweed jacket and open collar and all of that. I'm sure they do the same at Harvard. And it's a uniform, I might add. And what happened was that I was standing in front of a building waiting for the building to be unlocked. And a woman came up to me and said, "Go get the janitor, tell him come up here and unlock this door." And my colleagues in the music department looked in shock that she would come up to me thinking I was in the position to get the janitor and I was working as a janitor for the university. And I was chairman of the music department. So I knew from then on, I would have a coat and tie, and always a coat and tie I wore to every class and to everything, and I never had that problem anymore. But I mean, I'm sure those are the kind of things that Eileen faced at Harvard. Fortunately, the students were open-minded. They wanted to know what I had to say, so they came in droves. And I can always say I took great pride in that half my students were Black and half white. I took great pride in that. So I didn't plan it that way. They couldn't have planned it that way. And I mean, I thought I was talking to a mixed community that wanted to hear. And for the Black students, it was interesting that they were interested in the music of their parents' generation. And I never thought of that, but that's what they were. Billy Eckstein, you know, Count Basie, they said, my father used to always talk about that. And then the white students were interested in terms of the music itself, in terms of what happened in Black music, because they were part of the rock generation that was coming along.
Great, thank you so much. And how was like the Black music scene in Boston at this time? And did you and Southern collaborate on any projects together, like compositional projects, or maybe even like a lecture together?
No, we didn't. I'm not a scholar. I wanted to get this straight right from the beginning. I'm a composer that thinks. I mean, not a scholar at all. Don't make any pretension to be a scholar. In fact, when I've been asked to write articles, I said, no, I'm going to write a piece of music. I've always chosen music over scholarship because music is where I'm going to be judged. Eileen and I never collaborated on anything, as I said, although we were friends. And I don't know what kind of collaboration we would have had. It's difficult for me to even conceive of that, you know. But certainly we were in awe of both careers. And I think we were just a spearhead of a group of minorities. And I'm not just talking about Blacks, I'm talking about minorities in general coming to the New England for education. I think we were just the top of the spearhead. And the top of that spearhead was made possible by Black students at Tufts protesting the fact that they were building a building and had little or no Blacks on the faculty. They had one, I think they had one. That was my friend Bernie Holliston. And the reason I came to Tufts, I had a chance to go to Dartmouth at the same time. And in fact, in John's research on the book, the dean at Dartmouth at the time was prepared to offer me a chair. I didn't know this, but I just found this out just the other day. But anyway, my choice of Tufts was based on going to see Dean Holliston, who was the Dean of Arts and Sciences. I said, oh, I could be a cinch. I could handle the music department. This would be nothing. It would be easy to do. So that's why I chose Tufts over Dartmouth at that time. They were looking for a chair.
And then also, you sort of mentioned it just now. Did you and Southern share any mutual friends in the Boston area?
Not that I know of. As I said, Joe was with her all the time. And her son at one point was on the faculty, on the staff rather at Tufts. But I don't know about mutual friends and things like that. My relationship with Eileen was typical of all the Black composers that I know, in terms of being a friend, a researcher, respected, and a scholar. That's it. That's in a nutshell. And I think what more could you want in a friendship? You know, I mean, it's just valuable.
Great, thank you. And so I'm just going to close with about 2 more questions, at least on my end. So in your words, what do you think is Southern's legacy?
Well, I think I've said what is legacy in terms of the spinoff. I really think that's important, and I think it's going to go on forever. Really, it's not just going to stop at the Smithsonian. I mean, it's going to go on because it needs to go on, because white society has never integrated us into its operations and its culture. So until that happens, I mean, you're going to always have these spinoffs, and it's going to be this continuous documentation of what we are doing as a culture. And I want to mention the fact that I always say that I'm not talking about Black American music. I'm talking about the history of American music, period. American music. And if you don't see that, you're blind.
And so as we are starting to curate this exhibition, putting the pieces of her life together, trying to celebrate her life and her impact, when people come to this exhibit, what is one thing that you want people to take away? Like or a couple of things, or yeah.
The one thing I would want people to take away is the detail of the research that she did as a scholar. I mean, that's the most important thing. She was a scholar. And when you go through this collection and see what she has put together to create that particular book, which is certainly now monumental, that in itself is what I want them to see, the details that it took. Certainly all the things weren't in that book. I mean, she felt bad by not being able to include jazz. And of course, that's a very important part of our history. But she would have to leave some of the classical music out. And she chose the classical music. Why? Because that wasn't going to get the attention. Jazz will get all kind of attention. Not intellectual attention, but attention. And books and everything. And so she had her focus, and she didn't deviate from that focus at all. And I certainly appreciated her sense of commitment to us as a culture.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, don't hang up yet.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so TJ, it's Carol back. Yeah, so I'm going to invite the whole seminar to come in and just say goodbye to you. Hello and goodbye. They've all been listening off to the side. And can you raise up the screen enough so that they'll see people standing up? Sure. Come on, folks. You won't be able to see all the bodies, but some of them anyway. But thank you. I mean, this has really been a meaningful interview, and it takes time and energy to do so, and I'm grateful. I mean, it's really, really very special.
Well, you're special in terms of our friendships, and I thank you for that.
Well, I feel the same way, and I'm hoping this summer when Ray Linda Brown's Florence Price book has a book party in Atlanta that maybe I'll try to be there.
Definitely. We're planning lunch or dinner. Put us down.
Okay. Definitely. So I'll let you know if that happens. But again, thank you so much.
Well, I'm interested in seeing this class, seeing what it looks like. Oh, it's great to see all of you. And I certainly want to thank you for your interest in music. I think your interest in music is transformed by your interest in people. And I think the most important thing you have to do in the future is document the culture. Tell what happens and tell what you have learned. A very important book is coming out in ethnomusicologist by Paul Berliner. It's the first complete documentation of an African ritual. And it's published by the University of Chicago Press. They have it now, they're printing it. And Cosmos Magaya, Paul's teacher, took him under his wing, Paul, and nurtured him. Now, let me tell you what Paul had to do to go through to get this. Paul was in Africa for 1 year, and they kept feeding him a lot of misinformation because they didn't think he was serious. He stuck it out. And once they realized he was serious and interested in the Ambira, they began to give him everything he needed as a scholar. It was a price to pay, but he paid the price. Don't get discouraged. Get into the culture, because that's the only way you will get the true picture of what you're looking for as scholars, regardless of your field. You can't.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much.
Take care and be well.
Okay, please be well, and congratulations to all of you, and have a good time in your educational process. We love you all. Bye.
Thank you.